Sometimes it feels like we're living in a real-life political thriller.
Oh, absolutely.
And the situation in Kenya right now
Yeah.
definitely fits the bill.
It's a fascinating time and a critical one for Kenyan politics. The stakes are incredibly high.
It really is. And you're right, critical is the word.
Yeah.
Our listeners sent over this whole stack of articles about Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua facing this impeachment attempt.
Right.
And wow, there's a lot to unpack here. For anyone who might not follow Kenyan politics super closely, Gachagua is second in command to President William Ruto.
Correct. And this impeachment attempt is, it's serious business. Gachagua's been fighting tooth and nail to stop it even going to court 11 times.
Wow.
But he hasn't had any luck with the courts, so now it all comes down to the Kenyan Senate.
11 court losses. That's a losing streak for the history books. It sounds like the Senate is his last hope to hold on to his position.
I think that's fair to say. You see, the Kenyan Senate is often seen as a more objective body compared to the National Assembly.
Good.
It's smaller, for one thing, with only 47 elected senators. So it's less susceptible to the kind of intense political pressure and lobbying that you get with a larger group like the National Assembly.
So less about passionate speeches and more about cool-headed deliberation then.
Exactly. Which is why Gachagua's team is probably breathing a small sigh of relief that it's gotten this far. But he still needs 17 senators to vote against impeachment for him to survive this.
And 17 out of 47. Wow, that's a pretty tight margin. It seems like every single vote will count.
Absolutely. And to understand where those votes might fall, you have to look at the party alliances in Kenya. We're talking about parties like the UDA, which is Gachagua, and President Ruto's party, the ODM, which is the main opposition party. And then you have Jubilee and Wiper, which are smaller parties but still hold some influence.
So it's not just about individual senators making a decision. It's about these party alliances and the power dynamics at play.
Precisely. For example, Gachagua needs to make absolutely sure he has the votes within his own party, the UDA. But even then, 291 MPs initially signed the motion to impeach him. That's way more than enough to pass it if they all vote yes.
So he's depending on some of those MPs to change their minds, to basically switch sides. That just adds another layer of suspense to all of this.
Right, and that's what makes this whole situation so captivating. There's so much at play: personal loyalties, political maneuvering, potential backroom deals. It's anyone's guess how it's all going to play out.
It really is. And it's not just happening in some vacuum. The articles you sent mentioned that public opinion is very divided on this.
It is, and that public pressure is something those MPs must be feeling intensely right now.
I bet. Especially with such a tight deadline looming. Gachagua has to appear before the National Assembly on Tuesday, right?
Yes. Tuesday is D-Day. He can either choose to appear in person or send his lawyers, but he has to respond to these allegations.
So Tuesday is when we'll see how he responds one way or another.
Yeah.
It really does feel like after months of these legal battles, everything is suddenly moving very quickly now.
It is a tight turnaround. After Gachagua's response, or lack thereof, the Speaker of the National Assembly has a mere 48 hours to send the results over to the Senate. And once it's in the Senate's hands, that's when the clock really starts ticking.
7 days, right? That's all the time they have to hold a hearing and then vote.
7 days to determine the fate of the deputy president.
Yeah.
That's a lot of pressure for sure. Now, for anyone wondering what happens if the impeachment motion actually passes in the National Assembly, it's important to remember the Senate's role is a bit different. It's not just a repeat performance.
You mentioned earlier that the Senate is seen as more objective, less susceptible to all the political back and forth.
Exactly. If the National Assembly is like this bustling marketplace full of these passionate voices and quick exchanges, then the Senate is more like a courtroom. Smaller, more focused on procedure, where evidence and arguments are carefully weighed.
Okay, that's a helpful way to think about it. So in this courtroom scenario, what are the key things we should be watching for? You mentioned the political parties earlier. But for our listener who might not be totally up to speed on all the ins and outs of Kenyan politics, can you break down those parties a bit more? Like, what do they stand for and why are they so important in this particular case?
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in all these acronyms.
Yeah.
So the UDA, Gachagua, and President Ruto's party, they campaign on a platform of economic change and what they call bottom-up development, focusing on empowering ordinary Kenyans.
And the ODM, the opposition party. What's their stance on all of this?
The ODM, led by Raila Odinga, they've historically been a vocal critic of Ruto and, by extension, Gachagua. They've been calling for more accountability from the government and have been highlighting corruption allegations against some officials. Then you've got Jubilee and Wiper, smaller parties with their own agendas and alliances. Sometimes they side with UDA, sometimes with ODM. It really depends on the issue at hand. It's a complex web for sure.
So Gachagua needs to secure votes not just from within his own party, the UDA, but potentially from these other parties as well.
Exactly. He needs to know who he can count on, who might be swayed, and who's sharpening their knives behind closed doors. The articles you sent actually highlight how some MPs from the UDA who initially supported the impeachment motion are now hinting they might change their vote.
Oh, interesting. Why the change of heart? I wonder, could it be public pressure?
That's definitely a factor. The articles you shared included quotes from Kenyans across the country, and it's clear that public opinion on this impeachment is deeply divided.
What are people saying?
Yeah.
What are some of their main concerns?
Well, some are all for it. They see Gachagua as embodying what they view as corruption within the government, and they believe removing him would send a really powerful message. They want to see accountability and real change. But then there's another segment of the population that's saying, hold on, we have bigger fish to fry. Meaning they're worried about the rising cost of living, access to healthcare, education, those bread and butter issues that affect their lives every single day. They see this impeachment as a distraction, a political power play that doesn't really address their immediate needs.
And those voices, those everyday concerns, that's what those MPs are hearing back home in their constituencies, right? It's no wonder they're feeling the pressure.
Absolutely. Do they side with their party, follow public sentiment, or prioritize their own political survival? It's a tough call for them. And with public opinion so divided, the pressure is really on as we get closer and closer to Tuesday.
It's a high-stakes game of political chess, for sure. And we're all watching to see who makes the next move.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. And it reminds us that behind all the political strategizing and backroom dealing, there are real people whose lives are being impacted by these decisions.
That's such a crucial point. You know, one of the articles you shared, I think it was a shopkeeper, she said something like, if they're going after the deputy president, they might as well go after the whole government. That really stuck with me. Yeah, I see what you mean. There's a definite sense of frustration there, a feeling that maybe the government isn't focusing on the things that really matter to people.
Exactly. There's a sense of disillusionment, this feeling that their everyday concerns, their struggles are being sidelined for these political battles. And, whether that's a fair assessment or not, it's a sentiment that those in power really can't afford to ignore.
Ignoring public sentiment can be a very risky move for any politician. But what I find really intriguing about all of this is how this case goes beyond Gachagua himself.
Right. It's bigger than just one man. It's like this test case for Kenyan democracy. It shines a light on how power works, the checks and balances, and what can happen when those at the top are accused of wrongdoing.
It really makes you think about the bigger picture here. Regardless of the outcome of this impeachment, attempt the relationship between the president and his deputy, that's got to be affected by all of this, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Even if Gachagua survives this whole thing, the political landscape in Kenya will be forever changed. The trust between him and Ruto, the alliances within their party, everything will have shifted.
So even if he wins this battle, he might still come out of it politically wounded.
That's definitely a possibility. And then we have to consider what this means for President Ruto as well. Does he come out of this looking stronger, more in control, or does this whole thing create cracks in his own base of support? Interesting questions.
That's what I'll be watching really closely, how he manages this crisis, how he handles these really choppy political waters. It'll be fascinating to see how it all unfolds.
And for our listener, keep a close eye on how those senators vote. Those votes are about more than just Gachagua's fate. They're revealing their own loyalties, their political strategies, and maybe even giving us a glimpse into their vision for the future of Kenya.
It really is a fascinating case study. Politics, power, and the will of the people all colliding. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.